That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. And welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. Welcome back to all of our listeners. Welcome back to all of our viewers. We have a special guest with us here today. Oh, no, it's not a special guest. It's our normal host, Ben. He's back. Welcome back, Ben.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back. So I've just returned from paternity leave, somewhat sleep deprived. I'm hoping that today I will be Joe Biden in 2008 rather than Joe Biden in 2024, and that I'll be able to speak coherently for a few minutes.
You've gone there already, Ben. You've gone there already, but you couldn't resist the temptation.
So all doing all right. But nice to be back and catching up with.
I'm just waiting for the memes.
Yes,
I'm waiting for the memes, Ben, of you. Sleep deprived, saying ridiculous things. We'll get you going viral at this rate.
At least I'll have an excuse. We could do. You'll have seen, Tom, the comparison video of Trump just sort of watching on as Biden just sort of. Well, he's not even quite rambling because there's not even little sort of nuggets of sentences. It's just this sort of strange. Anyway, difficult scenes.
It's going to be memed to death, and I think it already has been, Ben.
Yeah. Well, I was just before we started speaking, the social media is awash in another sort of frenzy about the idea that he's about to resign imminently, or not resign, but rather stand down as the nominee. So we'll have to see. It really is election overload, and we've just got the results of the French elections. So it's 11 a.m. on Monday morning that we're recording this.
Democratic process on steroids in every part of the world, and I don't know how I feel about it either, Ben, because they're all so different, and yet similar strands running through them at the same time.
Well, there were two men in my local who I overheard a couple of weeks ago, just a few days before baby was born, and they were very cross about the number of elections going on, and the French having just entered the fray at that point. They thought that was enough. Too much news to focus on.
I hope you let them know they probably don't have a vote in all of them. So they shouldn't worry. Just focus on the football. We're through. We're through to the quarterfinals, which is fantastic news. England is anyway. England is. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I want Italy to win because which is very unpatriotic of me, but we have an FSU sweepstake, and I must say I know as much about football as Rishi Sunak does, but I think I understand Italy's fairly good, and I think I'm in line to win about 25 quid. So it may be a more prudent bet than some of those placed by policemen and general election candidates.
Yeah, Ben, we're not great football knowledge people. Toby is. He knows his football, but we're not. I had to look yesterday. I had Denmark, and I had to check online as to whether or not Denmark is still in the competition, and I also have no idea when the dates are. So we might have lost about half our listeners there, Ben, just by admitting to our ignorance of football. But we're looking forward to seeing who gets the sweepstake anyhow.
Yeah, well, the other two viewers are still here, so it's fine. Should we plow on, Tom?
Let's plow on to our first main item.
Yeah. So this is my item. This is something that has been ticking away for 6 months, and this is the case of somebody who is not called Amelia Sparrow, but who is crowdfunding. And subscribers to our newsletter will have seen this in our monthly newsletter that's just gone out and our weekly newsletter last week. So she's doing this under a pseudonym. She's a young woman, 24, a parliamentary aide. And she came to us with an incredible story right at the start of this year. She had gone to go and work for a Liberal Democrat MP who we're not naming at this stage. And she had worked there for 3 full days. And then on the morning of the fourth day, she was called into a Teams meeting, a one-to-one meeting with this MP, expecting a kind of innocuous catch-up. This is day 4. How are things going, etc., etc. There have not been any issues. There had not been any sign of anything being untoward. She enjoyed the work, was very good at it, and there had not been any kind of problem. So she went into this meeting, as people so often do with HR meetings, not necessarily expecting trouble, and that's when she was ambushed by this revelation that there had been some kind of complaint that had been made about her. She had no idea what the complaint could possibly be about, and then rather than the MP saying, "Amelia, this is what someone has said to me about your work and about your conduct. This is what I want to talk to you about. This is what I want to ask you about." You will have the opportunity to defend yourself, and to explain what's gone on. Amelia was asked to speculate about what she thought the complaint might be about.
That's ridiculous. I mean, have you ever heard of anything like that happening, Ben, when
Well,
someone sits you down and says, a complaint's been raised, what do you think it is? It's totally reversing a situation where there's already a power dynamic to the advantage of the employer, who the employee is nervous, and then turning it around and saying, what do you think you're here for? Well,
yeah.
If the police don't take you down the station and say, why do you think we arrested you? Unless they're bad police officers.
It's bonkers. And we see, as viewers will imagine, a lot of really shoddy kind of HR stuff, really dubious practices by HR. But I think in the unique environment that is the House of Commons, where members of MP's staff work for that MP, they're not working for a political party. It's a very bizarre employment relationship where each MP is almost like their own small business, but paid for by the taxpayer. So it's a very strange situation. So Amelia then was trying to respond to this open invitation to speculate about what the issue might have been. And she started describing a brief exchange she'd had in the office with another MP's staff member. And they'd been watching an SNP member of Parliament speaking in a debate about the Rwanda bill at the time. And during that exchange, Amelia said that she admired that MP's stance on human rights. The other staffer said, "Isn't she a transphobe?" To which Amelia replied, "No, she's a women's rights activist." Another colleague said, "Let's not get into that now. This isn't the time for it." The conversation moved on. That was the end of the matter. Now, what Amelia didn't do in that conversation, when she was describing the conversation to this Lib Dem MP, to her employer, was name the SNP member of Parliament she'd been praising. That member of Parliament was Joanna Cherry, who has been very outspoken. I don't like the word outspoken. It suggests something that you've been defeated. She's been very vocal in defending the rights of women and girls, gender critical feminists, freedom of speech. And so Amelia
also, when you're giving a story about an incident, you want to lay the story out appropriately with all the facts, but you also, it's not as though Joanna Cherry was going to get into trouble or something, but you're also hesitant to name other parties if you're wise, because you don't want to drag other people into a situation. You want to get through a meeting, you want to describe the facts, and you want to then understand where you stand. But it wouldn't make sense always to give every detail of who said what precisely, because you don't want to get people in trouble, or you don't want things to go in directions they don't need to go in. You just want to stick to the facts, especially when you're put on the back foot like this.
Particularly as at this point, Amelia, our young parliamentary aide, didn't even know that this conversation was what had triggered the complaint.
Right.
She was giving a summary of all of the conversations and meetings and interactions she'd had over the 3 days in which she'd been in the job. So there is a natural limit to the amount of detail that you would provide. Crucially, she was never asked by her employer the name of the MP who she had praised.
So it was never a direct question.
No. So she was never evasive about it. She was never asked about it. Now, what happened then is in essence that because Amelia had praised Joanna Cherry's stance on protecting the rights of women and girls, she was after that dismissed by this Lib Dem MP after just days working for her, sacked from her dream job for completely bogus reason that somehow she'd not been honest because she had not named Joanna Cherry.
And Ben, how did the disciplinary go with the other party who'd called Joanna Cherry a transphobe? Where was that disciplinary going?
Well, right. There's no issue there. There's no disciplinary there. There's no action taken there, because one side of this debate is allowed to express their view, however unreasonable I imagine viewers will consider that view to be. But for Amelia, the book was thrown at her completely. She argues because of her sex realist, gender critical beliefs, because she'd praised Joanna Cherry. And all of this is pinned on this nonsense charge about somehow being dishonest, even though, as I've said, she'd never actually been asked who the MP was. So she came to us when all of this was still going on, very early in the process, which is always for the best. It means we can intervene at an earlier stage, and will be of more help to people who are in employment disputes or other disputes of various kinds. She came to us early on, and we've been assisting her with this case ever since, including giving her money to speak to a lawyer, Liz McGlone, and also now we've launched a crowdfunder for her at the end of last week, which, as of this morning, is just over halfway there. So I think in 4.5 days we have raised £5,200 at the time of writing, and what Amelia is motivated by is defending right to freedom of speech of all of us, and also for making a stand for, I think, particularly for young women who now face going through what, broadly speaking, an older generation of women have had to go through, and have had to fight against for the last 5 years. And I think we see in this case what startled me about it, in terms of the implications for it beyond this particular dispute, was the idea that all of the cancel culture, all of the harassment and cancelling of women and men, for that matter, with sex realist views, could all return. It could be visited on a new generation. We're obviously days away from a change of government, and so there is a real sense of hard-won gains now being jeopardised, and I think because of that, I would urge people to donate. Donations of 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds really do stack up. And I would say as well, we have an amazingly generous and supportive membership, and we have raised truly life-saving sums of money for people to get legal representation, which I think we're all very proud of and would be impossible without our members.
The word that resonates with me as you describe this situation is courage. I feel that right the way through this, it comes across how courageous Amelia has been from early on in realizing that this was an issue of young women in the workplace being able to say truth, to speak truth and not be frightened and not be crushed. And I wonder whether that, for us, it's not a surprise because we see it every day. For you, Ben, and for our listeners, for our viewers, it's not a surprise. But I think the country is waking up to the fact it takes courage to stand up to this. We had the incident last week, and we don't have the details in front of us, so I can't remember all the incidents, but there were a bunch of nurses who went onto television to talk about the transgender policy in their NHS trust and the fear that was rippling through the young women, particularly in the women's changing rooms. And the word, again, that has come to the fore when they've seen those women, those NHS employees, those nurses go to the media, sit around and be interviewed by the media, is courage.
Just say, in the time we've been speaking, in the last 3 or 4 minutes, we've gone up another £130 has been donated. So I've been obsessively refreshing this crowdfunder because I think it's really great to see such a positive reaction to it and people wanting to help Amelia defend herself and also the rights of all the rest of us. And it's fantastic to see so much support. So we will include a link to the crowdfunder under this week's episode in the show notes and
Definitely.
in the description on YouTube. Tom, unless
But we
there's
should
anything
move on, shouldn't we,
to
to the
add,
next item?
yeah.
We stay, and our listeners will not be surprised to hear that we stay with this whole issue of gender ideology, the fact that that has infected all of our institutions. We've already talked about the NHS. We've already talked about Parliament and political parties. And now we're talking again about young people. We're talking about schools. And that many of our listeners will have heard this instance where a 12-year-old schoolboy, this was reported in the Mail last week, has been investigated by counter-extremism officers after he declared that there are only two genders. Now, there are many sort of elements to this. He was also, there were things he uploaded onto social media. He was playing with a bow and arrow, a crossbow, I think, and that was sort of drawn into the discussion. When he was eventually visited, because this is what happened, he was visited by Prevent and Northumbria police officers, and they put the family under what the mother described as an interrogation. I mean, in essence, what's happened here is that because the child has said these things at school, there are only two genders. He said there's no such thing as non-binary. He said at one point, because someone thought he supported transgender ideology and he was being bullied for that, he said, "I'm not queer, I'm gay." And he's got in trouble for that as well. But what really struck me about that last one, Ben, is smart boy. Wow. I know a lot of people who are unable to make that distinction, who don't realize that the gay issue and queer theory, which we've spoken about before, which is a totally different struggle against normality and any categorization of normality, that he's understood the distinction between that and sexual orientation. He's smart. This kid is smart. And yet, because he speaks truth and because he is smart, he has ended up being reported to Prevent, which is ultimately saying you're at risk of being so radicalized that you're a terror threat potentially. I mean, it's absolutely barking, stark, raving bonkers, Ben. And as I say, maybe there are things that Prevent and Northumbria Police, because they're obviously not able to comment on the situation on their side, because there are rules and regs around what they're allowed to say on individual cases, which is quite right. And maybe there is something that we don't know. But from the facts that have been alleged and reported in the Mail, this is another instance of capture in our schools and another instance of someone who is smart, a smart kid, saying very sensible things, being punished, profoundly punished, actually. This is terrifying to have the police turn up like this. So, a depressing situation again.
I was visiting over the weekend my wife's grandparents, and
Your what? Sorry,
my wife's grandparents.
Yeah,
and I was thinking how difficult it is to explain what we're doing, the battle that we're engaged in, who we're fighting this against, and what they want, to the older generation, who, by and large, not on social media, not in contact with these issues, for obvious, understandable reasons, and it's got to a point where it's almost impossible to try and convey what we're doing and why we're needed, because the other side is so loopy. And with this case, we can see yet again, as if any more evidence of this was needed, how programs like Prevent, which start out being aimed entirely at genuine extremism, of which Islamism, jihadism, should overwhelmingly be the focus for the British state. There is no shortage of Islamism in the United Kingdom. That should be the overwhelming focus. It's not the only security issue, of course, but it is the main one by some way. And when Prevent was launched, it was quite clear that Islamism was going to be its major focus. Far right extremism as well is an element, but that's not It should not be the primary focus. But every initiative like this basically is captured, and the way in which it filters through the state, through down to the level of local police, local council, schools, etc. It has got to the point where it is utterly disconnected from the actual security situation in the country. And we have officers going to the home of a 12-year-old schoolboy for saying there's no such thing as non-binary and there are only two genders, and so on. Completely ludicrous. And yet this is what we have to keep in mind whenever any government is proposing some measure that on the subject of Islamism sounds proportionate and reasonable. We cannot trust the British state or its agents at any level to focus an initiative like Prevent on the actual adversary we have. It will be distorted and misused, abused, misfocused on people like this who are no security threat, who are expressing the view of the vast majority of the public.
Well,
and this is going to happen again and again and again.
That's the point. It is the view of the vast. So there's a war on the public, because there must be. These views are clearly held, like your wife's grandparents, clearly held by the majority of the country. And clearly, most living rooms, people are shaking their heads at it and saying, this is ridiculous. This cannot be, surely. And yet it is. And it's happening again and again. And I think it's well worth quoting Kate Barker, who is the chief executive of the LGBT Alliance. She said, if it's a sign of radicalization to say you don't like being called queer, then according to our research, 94% of LGBT people, that's lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, can expect a knock on the door from counter-terrorism officers. I mean, I'd hate being called queer. It's an insult as far as I'm concerned. And particularly as I'm now looking into queer theory, and I'm reading this book by James Lindsay called The Queering of the American Mind, really interesting book, and really makes these parallels between queer theory and critical race theory, and the sort of constant desire that will never end, by the way, within these theories, the constant desire to redefine everything against normality. And this is why conservatism with a small c has been unable to stand up against it, because conservative with a small c is by definition the enemy. Anything that is inherited by one generation from another is the enemy, because it's the norm. It's whatever you label normality. And queer theory by definition is saying, do not go by the norms. Do not define yourself by the norms. The norms are flawed. The norms are worse than that. They are evil. They're the things that lead to all the evils in our society. So your duty, young person, is to be queer. Your duty is to, and it's a verb, you are to queer everything so that normality falls. And this never ends, because normality is always being redefined. There are always new norms against which you must then fight. And so when someone says, oh, he's gay or he's queer, those are that's why I say smart boy.
Yeah.
I think he's done his reading. I think he's doing some thinking, and he's 12. And then I see the officers, the authorities coming into the situation. They haven't a clue. They've been duped. We talk about captured. They've been duped. They've turned off their brains. Ideas like allyship are being used against them. They're the Kool-Aid. They're the poison, as I've said before. The toxicity in all of this is allyship, because you lay your agency down on the side. You drink the Kool-Aid. You turn into a drone. You don't make your own views and opinions. And so, I come back again to what Kate Barker says. 94% of LGBT people can expect a knock on the door from counterterrorism officers. She says, we applaud this young boy for standing up for his beliefs, and we condemn the teachers and police who think it's wrong to abhor this horrible slur. So it's, when you look into these theories, it starts to make sense, Ben. But again, who's going to look into these theories? You have to do the reading. You have to go back and think about it and make the connections and the links. Who's got the time for that? And who's going to want to do that? And that's the trick, of course.
The other element to this is that this family is Jewish. This boy was also said to harbour extremist views, because he was asked if he thought there were any groups that shouldn't exist. And he responded, Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
They're
what?
proscribed organisations that they're
Yeah.
hated by the British state.
So what do you think has happened there? My view is that will have been heard by somebody who is completely ignorant about the conflict, about the politics of conflict, about the various groups involved in it, the antagonists, um, and has just conflated in their own mind Hamas, Palestinian, and so thinks that somebody saying Hamas should be completely destroyed is somebody who's saying that the Palestinians should be exterminated. I'm not sure. I might be wrong, but my gut feeling is not that is that malice, but it's just complete ignorance.
Yeah.
And that's something that we encounter so often when we're dealing with the various disputes that our members find themselves in. It's just a complete absence of knowledge about history, politics, culture, and this of course pervades all the EDI stuff that we see. That's all completely disconnected from the actual cultural experiences and values that different peoples hold. And you see it, I would argue, here as well, with somebody who is just completely ignorant and thinks that saying Hamas should be exterminated is in some way an extreme view.
And you can't blame the foot soldiers if you're a new police officer or even a new teacher and you've just read the handbook and you've just said,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I don't understand all of this, but apparently we're meant to report this. Or the
Yep.
police officer saying, oh, that I don't understand that. I blame the superintendent back at the police station, and I blame the headmaster or headmistress in the headmaster or headmistress's office. They're the people with the experience. They're the people who need to have the knowledge and the discernment and the wisdom to distinguish between these issues and to pick through them and just say, no, you don't need to worry about that. That's not what that means. But what I would then say once you've squashed it is say, don't stop reporting things to me, obviously, because you're new and you'll learn the ropes in time. So come to me quickly if you have a question, and I'll knock it down, or we can take it further. But on this one, let's knock it down because of this, and this. And that's how it's meant to work. That's what the superintendent's supposed to do. That's what the headmaster's supposed to do. But my understanding from the school perspective is that they've effectively scolded the family. They've been incandescent that this was said in class. And this is someone as well. So the mother has also said the child, the 12-year-old child, was actually being bullied and receiving vile abuse. Clearly, there was some homophobic abuse, but also some anti-Jewish, some anti-Semitic abuse as well from kids, because we know kids are cruel. And you'd have thought that's what we need to deal with in the school. That's real bullying right in front of our eyes, and we need to deal with that. And we need to deal, like we would have 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago in the education system, that would have been the narrative. There's something really, really rather vile that's reached the playground, probably because of all the noise in the on the 6 o'clock news. This anti-Semitism has reached the playground. We've got things going on that are homophobic in the playground as well. We need to deal with them quickly, and not let them spiral out of control. But no, they're spiraled out of control because people are terrified that if they're later on, if someone says, oh, well, you should have done this, people don't have the courage of their conviction to make a big decision early on and just to put a stop to it. So there's so many things in this, Ben, that have gone wrong, clearly, to reach this very dystopian, authoritarian outcome. It's difficult to know where to start, really.
And we are at the Free Speech Union batting these things away as quickly as we possibly can, along with other campaign groups. Also, and also, the final thing I would say on this point, particularly around prevent, is that there is so much more of this type of thing going on than is in the public domain. I mean, I can think of examples that I'm afraid I can't discuss. You have to take my word for it or not. That are on our books right now, which may or may not be in the public domain one day. I hope that they will be, because I think there's a serious public interest in exposing things like this.
Yeah.
It just depends on the facts of the case. Sometimes it's not possible.
Yeah, and the frequency of these events is something that we're always trying to get across at the Free Speech Union. When I was looking at the 12-year-old boy's story last night, I thought that there was a similar thing happened in Scotland. We had the similar thing happen at Ryde College a year ago. You only need to search it on Google, for example, and you'll find very, very similar resonant cases that have happened over just the last 2 or 3 years. So there is a lot out in the public domain, but like you say, that one of our key messages is to get it out further. But we should move on, shouldn't we? We're getting stuck on these really important issues. They are so important, and they're affecting people's lives, and we need to give them the airtime that they need. But this next one, Ben, is we're moving to the United Nations. And so it's a totally different topic that we've changed to. But last week, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced plans for new global principles to guide governments and big tech, helping them to completely eradicate what he defines as hate speech. So the topic here is hate speech. And the United Nations, what are they doing in regard to hate speech? And he made a statement, and it's not a long statement. I was looking at it over the weekend. But it's got some really frightening elements in it. So obviously he makes some reasonable points, but within that there are some very worrying points. For example, what I really worried about is reimportation of some of the ideas that we've been batting away at the UK level, of ideas that come through the Online Safety Act. So, for example, what he's really doing here is he's trying to say that the strategy and plan of action on hate speech document that the UN actually published back in 2019 isn't getting enough purchase with governments. They're not implementing it sufficiently. So when he made the statement last week, that's what he's hinting at. We need some broader principles so that individual countries and states start to implement their strategy and plan of action. So off you go and look up this strategy and plan of action on hate speech, and you read the document. Again, not a long document. And you realize that what they're doing is they're saying things like, it is important to underline that even when not prohibited, hate speech may be harmful. And so this whole legal but harmful thing gets re-imported by any state that decides to import into its regulations at state level this UN plan of action set of principles. And so, one of the things I thought is, first of all, oh Lord, we've had this debate at state level, and quite a good debate in Parliament, and Free Speech Union's been involved in that. We do all of that, and then the UN brings it in through the back door. And just one more thing before I hand on the baton over to you, Ben, is again, the language. So when they define hate speech in this document, the strategy and plan of action on hate speech, it's defined as any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are. In other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor. With so much in there, Ben, not defined or explained. So words like attack, pejorative, discriminatory. These are the total elimination of hate speech is their aim and their goal, but they're not defining things clearly, and they're also going to start wading straight back into this debate, this argument about legal but harmful. So as I sort of dipped into it over the weekend, I was head in hands thinking, how do we win this? Or even, where is the battle actually happening? We think it might be happening in Westminster, we think it might be happening in Brussels, but it's also happening, at the United Nations headquarters in New York. And you think, how do you fight on three sides at once?
That I think is the worst definition of anything that I have ever read in my life. So let's just dwell on some of the wording before we have to finish. Any kind of communication that attacks a person on the basis of who they are or any identity factor.
Yeah.
That could mean quite literally any adversarial, hostile, critical, negative remark made about anybody in any context at any time for any purpose. It could include anything.
Yeah.
And the list of characteristics, so religion, ethnicity, so on, or other factor.
Yeah.
It's completely open-ended. I mean, ludicrously vague, and chilling. But you're right. It as with so many of these battles, there is this sort of whack-a-mole action required, isn't there?
And again, I'm very conscious of time, but the last point I would make on this is that what this is also doing is it's separating something that we put very carefully together in British law, which is hate speech is defined as an aggravating factor to an underlying crime. Once you take hate speech away from an underlying crime and turn it into a standalone crime, you have a real problem. Because if hate speech becomes a standalone crime and there's no underlying assault or harassment or whatever it might be, then you have to monitor it. You have to police it. If you're going to monitor hate speech on a standalone basis, then you've got to collect data, which means you have to have cameras everywhere. You have to have a sort of, almost as we talked about with the Scottish hate crime, but effectively you have to create a 1984 society, is what I'm saying. You have to chill free speech by definition. If you separate hate speech as a standalone thing from any underlying traditional crime, by definition you have to create a totalitarian, authoritarian society. And so this pressure and this naivety, well, maybe it's not naive. Maybe I'm naive to think it's naive. But that is where this kind of thought process from the very top of the United Nations takes us. So not a very happy state of affairs, I think, Ben.
Well, next time we will be post-election, and I dare say we will have lots to discuss as normal. But I think, Tom, for now, that's us, isn't it?
I think for today it is. So thank you again to all our listeners and our viewers. Welcome back, Ben, and we will speak to you next week.
Bye-bye.